they build a product, and then it can end up being quite complex. Maybe I can give an example of a recent one I spoke to. So they do invoicing, like invoice and pay, which means they're up against like QuickBooks and Xero and those guys.
Right.
Then they did inventory management, which is like a whole other thing. And then they have like ERP software, which is like a whole other thing. And like, they're like kind of come to us and they say like, hey, we have this thing, it's built, like we have some customers, not too many, but like we just need you guys to throw some like marketing magic dust on this thing and like get us some revenue. It's like, but guys, in the real world this doesn't work. April, welcome to the show.
It's so good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. No, the pleasure is totally mine. But who is April Dunford? And you can take like the surface level
who is
path, or you
April
can take
Dunford?
the deep philosophical one. Yeah, your choice.
I'll give you the view from a million feet. So I used to be a repeat vice president of marketing at a series of startups. I did that for like 25 years. Yeah. I think I did 7 startups. 6 of those got acquired. So, through acquisition, you end up hanging out with the big companies for a bit. But a few years back, I made the jump to consulting, and now I am a positioning expert. And so what I do is I work with tech companies. I only do positioning work. I don't do anything else. I don't do copywriting or lead gen or anything else. I just do positioning work. Most of the companies I work with are, I would say, growth stage tech companies, SaaS for the most part. The smaller ones are sort of like $1 million, $2 million revenue. The bigger ones are like sort of pre-IPO, I guess you would call it. And we just do positioning work. That's it. That's my jam.
I was actually going to ask this towards the end, but how did you kind of transition to being kind of VP of marketing to a consultant? What was the decision making behind that?
Yeah, there was a bunch of things. So one thing was that, I did the VP marketing role really early in my career, like for no good reason. Like they just made me VP. I shouldn't have been VP, but but I made VP really early. And then, once you're VP, you don't look back. But I did that job kind of over and over. After the last one, I was like, I think I've done this. Like, I think I've done this job. And, I've done it at big companies. I've done it at little companies. I've done it at companies that are really techie. I've done companies that are less techie, and I've had big teams. I've had small teams. I've had big budgets. I've had small budgets. And I just couldn't get excited about going to do the next one. I was like, I think it's time for a change to do something else. And so, so I spent some time thinking about what that something else might be. And in particular, I had spent the last few years of me being a VP trying to teach positioning as a concept, because it's a really hard thing to do. Mm-hmm. Not a lot of people are very good at it. It's not taught well at all. No. It's not really taught at all, but it's not taught well. And so when I did decide to make the jump to consulting, I thought, well, here's a thing that, I know a lot about. I've done a lot of positioning work in my job. So I know a lot about this thing. I have kind of a methodology that I've been using for the past 10 years myself. And I think this would be a useful thing to go teach people, because nobody knows how to do it. And so I thought, okay, that'll be the thing that I focus on. So here we are.
Well, thank you for that.
It's working out pretty good so far.
Yeah, for sure it is. I mean, just for context as well, we got introduced by one of our clients, Landbot. You've done some positioning work for them.
Yeah.
And they were extremely.
Yeah, I love those guys.
Yeah, they're a great team, and they spoke very, very highly of you. So after I heard that, I was very keen to have you on the show. So how did you? This is kind of an interesting question. How did you position yourself as a positioning consultant? Like, did you already have kind of? It's a really random question, but did you already have like a bank of content, and you were already kind of known in that space, or were you like, okay, I want to become a positioning consultant? Like, I'm going to kind of eat my own dog food. Like, how was that?
Yeah, so it does kind of work the same as positioning a tech product. It's not actually any different, right? So, I think this is something that maybe consultants should spend more time on. So, the first thing is you got to sit down and say, okay, like, what's different about me? Like, what have I got that other consultants don't have? And if I go out and look in the land, there's, I'm not qualified to be a copywriter. I write lousy copy. I have an engineering degree. You don't want me to write your copy, right? So there's all these things that as a VP marketing, I had people on my team that would do. But then it's kind of like, well, why would you actually want to hire me? Like, what can I do that no one else can do? And so I centered on this positioning methodology as a thing. Like, I've got this, nobody else has this, so I could position around that. At the beginning, when I first started consulting, like 5-6 years ago, positioning kind of wasn't a thing. Like, nobody was talking about positioning. Like, I had a hard time explaining even what I did, because I'd say I'm a positioning expert. Everybody, oh, that's great. What's positioning? And I'm like, okay, let's back it up a little bit. So at the beginning, I used to talk about market strategy and go-to-market strategy, and positioning is kind of the step one on that. And so I spent a lot of time kind of speaking at conferences and writing stuff about here's what positioning is and here's why it's important. Not, here's why you should hire me. Just kind of like, here's what it is and here's why you should think about it once in a while. And then that just sort of gradually evolved into, more and more people, I think, sort of understanding it. I think there's an element of timing in there too. Like in marketing, we tend to have these big pendulum swings. Like we swing between being really obsessed with tactics to being really obsessed with strategy. And I think right when I started doing consulting, we were coming off a good 10 years of people being stupidly obsessed with tactics, like 10 years of like growth hacking and just tactical stuff. And I think people were ready for a swing back to thinking more about the bedrock strategy pieces. And so I think there was a little bit of good timing in there. And then a couple of years back, I wrote a book that kind of outlines the methodology. And that book got sort of popular. Again, I think there's a bit of timing element in that. And then I was doing a lot of public speaking. And so all those things sort of came together to now, people sort of know me as like the positioning lady.
You're positioned as the positioning lady, for
Yeah,
sure. And I'm definitely interested to hear more about the book and kind of how that came about and how that process was. But obviously, I'm going to ask you now the kind of obligatory question, which is, what is positioning? I think it's pretty misunderstood. If you ask 100 different people, you'll probably get like 25, 30 different answers. So, in your mind, what is positioning? Yeah.
Yeah. So the thing that people mainly confuse positioning with is messaging. So they think it's the same as messaging, which in my mind, it's not at all. Like if you came to me and said, hey, April, write messaging, I'd say, okay, great. So who's it for? And you'd have to know. And then I'd say, well, what's it about? And so, I got a message about this product. Okay, who does it compete with and why is it different and better? Like you need to be able to tell me all these things before we can go write messaging. So in my mind, positioning is foundational to almost everything we do in marketing and sales. It's kind of the input to that. So my definition of positioning goes like this. So positioning defines how your product is the best in the world at delivering some value that a well-defined set of customers cares a lot about. So that's a big mouthful of a definition, but most of the time when I'm talking to non-marketing people and I'm trying to explain it, the best way to think about it is like context setting for products, right? Like if you encounter something brand new, you've never encountered it before, you'll look for clues in the context about what it's all about, So, what's the price of this thing and what are the features and who do they compare themselves to and what customers do they serve? And you'll piece that all together and kind of answer the big questions like, what is this? So that you can pay attention to the little stuff. It's a lot like, you can think of it as like the opening scene of a movie, right? You walk in off the street, you sit down, lights go down, and you don't know anything about this thing. Yeah, maybe you saw the trailer, right? But you don't know anything about the thing. And so the opening scene of a movie, the job of the opening scene is to kind of set context so you can get a feel for where am I and what time frame is this and who are these people and how should I be feeling? And then I can settle in and pay attention to the details. So the opening scene of almost every American movie starts with a panning shot of the city skyline. And you'll be like, oh, Empire State Building, we're in New York. Oh, Golden Gate Bridge, we're in San Francisco. Oh, oh, it's the beach, whatever, it's Miami. And so, and why is that? It's because a movie that takes place in New York is really different from a movie that takes place in Miami, which is really different from a movie that takes place in San Francisco. And so it almost always starts with that. Then we'll zoom down to a neighborhood and I can see cars and clothing and I can tell what time, is this modern day or is this in the past or whatever. Then they'll zoom in on a person and the person will be doing something and you'll get an introduction to the character. Position's a bit like that. It's a bit like, well, what is this? What market is it in? What's going on? And now I can pay attention to little things that actually make you different and special.
Yeah, interesting. And it's more difficult because you don't have kind of the visual slides, but you also break it down into kind of 5 components, right? Yeah. Would you mind just kind of like summarizing those components just to help put a bit of meat on the bone?
Yeah. So, and I'll give you a little context on this. So when I started, first job I ever had at a university, I'm in this company. And we got 3 products and I get assigned, because I'm new, I get assigned to this shitty product. So I get assigned to the one that's not selling. It's terrible. No one likes it. We spent all this money building it. We sell it for $100 a pop off the website and we sold 200 copies of the thing in 6 months. It's a disaster. And so I get this job and my job is to like call all the people that have bought the product and decide how disappointed they're going to be when we shut it off, because we're going to shut it off. So I call all the people and I did 100 calls and 92 calls. People didn't care. Like they didn't even know they had it. Half of them, they're like, we bought that? What? Oh yeah. We never use it for anything. Yeah, whatever. But then I got 5 or 6 that were like, oh, this thing's amazing, and they were doing something with it that we never anticipated. So we had originally positioned this product as desktop productivity software, like an alternative to Excel or Microsoft Access. And instead, what these people were using it for was like an embeddable database for mobile devices. Really, really, really different. And so instead of canning the product, based on these 5 or 6 customers, we said, well, let's take a crack at positioning it as embeddable database for mobile devices. And so that was a really different kind of go-to-market. Like we had to hire a salesperson. We had to change the pricing. The roadmap for the product changed. At the beginning, the product was the same. And we went out and the thing was wildly successful, grew like crazy. We ended up getting acquired by some big database company in the Valley. And they made me VP marketing. This is amazing. I got like a huge team of people and I can't spell marketing. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. And I got this big team and this big budget. So I decided I'm going to go to marketing school. So I reading books and this company had a big training budget. So I'm taking some classes and stuff. And this positioning thing keeps coming up. And I know it's important because we just did it. And it was literally the difference between a thing that was failing and a thing that isn't failing now, right? So I go to the school and we're doing a class on positioning. Today's topic is positioning. I'm like, great, because we didn't know what we were doing. We just kind of stumbled our way through it. It'd be good to know how I actually should do this stuff. So I'm in the class, professor gets up, and he's like, okay, today's topic is on positioning. It's fantastic. And here's how you do it. And he puts up this slide, and it's the positioning statement. And yeah, I don't know if you ever did a positioning statement. It's like a Mad Libs, fill in the blanks. This product is a blank that does blank for blank and blank, blank, blank. And you fill in things like, here's my market category, here's my target segment, blah, blah, all this stuff. And he says, and that's how you do it. You just, you take this statement, you fill in the blanks, and then you write this thing down, and that's it. And then he goes to switch to the next topic. And I'm like, whoa, hang on. And I'm at the back, and I'm like, no. And I got my hand up. I'm like, my dude, no. Like, let me explain the situation. So I give him the whole story about, we thought it was desktop productivity software. It turns out it's embeddable database for mobile devices. How could we have saved ourselves 2 years of effort? How would we? And you got a blank there that says market category. But this thing could have been positioned in any market category. How do I know what the best market category is? And the guy did this thing where he did the whole professor thing on me. I'm at the back. I'm like, how do we know? And he like squints up at me and he's got his glasses, screws up his face. Like, who's that? I'm like, me. How do you know? And he's like, trust me, April, you'll just know.
That's some shitty advice.
Right? And at that point, I was like, oh, I get it. No one knows how to do this. Not even the fancy professor at the fancy university in the marketing class knows how to do this. So at that point, I thought, well, okay, no one knows how to do this. That's ridiculous. And at this point, I've done it a few times. So I figure, I got ego. I'm like, oh, I can figure this out. So I figure I'm going to treat this like I have a degree in system design engineering. I'm like, we're going to treat this like an engineering problem. We're going to break it into pieces and then solve for the component pieces. So the first thing was, what are the pieces? Well, the pieces we're all in agreement on. So the pieces, even the university professor would agree on this, is the blanks in the positioning statement. And all positioning statements are not exactly the same, but basically there's 5 things. So we agree these are the 5 component pieces. So it's the first one is competitive alternatives. So who you compete with. Second one is unique features or capabilities. What do you got the competitors don't have? Next one is differentiated value. So what's the value that you can deliver for customers your competitors can't do? Next one is target customer segments. So you go sell to anybody, but some people really love your stuff. So who's your best fit customers look like? And then the last one is market category, which is, coming back to this idea of context setting. It's the context you position the product in, but it kind of answers the question, what is this? Like, is it email or is it chat? Is it CRM or is it team collaboration? So that's market category. So those are the 5 things. So I got to that part pretty easy. But then things got really hard after that.
Yeah. One of the things.
Go ahead.
Sorry, please. No, I was going to say one of the things about positioning is that it's like there are so many components, and you can just change one of those components, and then the rest of them also. It's almost like a moving puzzle, right?
That's
and choose a different category. It's like, oh man, I'm up against a whole different bunch of competitors, and they have a different piece of value, and so like I guess there has to be some logical process. And I think your advice, correct me if I'm wrong, is that you should start with the competitive landscape first. Like, who the hell are you competing against?
Yeah. But that wasn't obvious to me at the beginning. Like at the beginning, I was like, okay, I think we could just break it apart and we'll solve for the pieces. I'll get the best answer for each of the pieces. Then I figure out how to bring them together, and that's how we're going to solve it. But yeah, like you have this problem that everywhere, everything you push, it bulges out on the other side. So it's like, so at the, and that's a thing that they don't teach you with this positioning statement, is that the components all have a relationship to each other. They're not independent. So if I look at value, like where does differentiated value come from? It only comes from our differentiated capabilities. That's all. That's the only place it comes from. It can't come from anywhere else. So those 2 things are inextricably tied. You have different capabilities with different value. That's how it works, right? But then I think about, well, what are my differentiated capabilities dependent on? Well, they're only differentiated when I compare them to competitive alternatives. So those things are all related. I can't just solve for one without knowing the other ones. And then it works the same with the other 2 too, right? Like, so my best fit customer, these are the people that care a lot about my differentiated value. That's what makes them a really good fit.
Yes.
And then the last one is market category. And it's a little esoteric, but your best market category is the context you position your product in, such that your differentiated value is kind of obvious to the customers you're trying to focus on. So yeah, where do you start? Like if everything connects to everything else, where do you start? And I spent, not a word of a lie, 2 years where I thought there is no starting point. That's why there's no positioning methodology. There's no good starting point. What you do is you pick a random spot, you work your way around the circle, you get candidate positioning, you take it out to the market. If it works, great. You run with it. If it doesn't, you chuck it out and you go back and you do the circle again and you find another candidate. So for 2 years, I did it like that. And here's the problem with this. Like, if you get it right on the first try, yay, everything's great. If you get it wrong on the first try, you got to go back and do it again. And your boss is pissed. And you're like, going to get fired maybe because your CEO founder's like, come on, man, it's been 3 months already. You don't have this figured out. And testing it, I got to run a bunch of customers through the pipeline and oh God. So it was awful for 2 years. And how I eventually solved this is I spent a couple of years going deep down the rabbit hole of jobs to be done. So I read a lot of Craig Christensen and I was thinking a lot about what is the intersection between positioning and jobs, because the job stuff was mainly getting used for, well, what feature should we build next? And are we building the right things to accomplish the job that the customer is trying to do? And in particular, like, I don't know how much you know about job stuff, but in particular, I was thinking about the milkshake story. You know the milkshake story? So this is a very famous jobs to be done story. And so what it is there's a fast food chain, and they want to find out how to make a better milkshake. And so they're interviewing people about, why do they buy milkshakes and when do they buy milkshakes and all this stuff. And what they discover is they sell a ton of milkshakes in the drive-through in the morning. And they're like, what is going on here? So then they interview all these people in the drive-through, and they find out people have got a long commute and they're hungry, but they don't want to eat like a breakfast sandwich or something because they're in the car and it's going to fall all over them and stuff. So they want something that fits in the cup holder, but at the same time they're hungry, right? So they don't want just a drink. They want like a meal in the cup holder. And ideally they want something that they're not going to finish in 5 seconds because they got a long, boring drive, right? So they're going to, have the milkshake and it's going to last for a while and it fits in the cup holder and all this stuff. So the ending to that story was, okay, well, how do we make a better milkshake for these people when we're trying to accomplish the job of, got to fit in the cup holder, whatever. And I was like, and I had this epiphany where I was like, oh shit, this is a positioning problem. Like, it's not a milkshake, it's a smoothie. Like, what you learn there is that they were thinking about the wrong competitive alternatives. Because if I went in and asked those people, what are the competitive alternatives to the milkshake? They would have said Egg McMuffin or a muffin or a bagel, and they wouldn't have been saying Coke, which is what you expected them to say. And so I had this epiphany, like, actually, we need to start with competitive alternatives. If we start with competitive alternatives, then we can say, all right, this is what we got to beat in order to get a deal done here. And baked into that is the job that the customer is trying to do. But even if I'm not sure of that, I can figure it out if I can figure out what the real competitive alternatives are. So I got to start with competitive alternatives. Once I've got that, that's my stick in the ground. That's reality. I got to beat this. And then you say, well, what have I got that the alternatives don't have? That's my differentiated capabilities. And then I can go down that list of capabilities and say, well, what is the value of that to these customers? And that'll get me differentiated value. Then once I have differentiated value, then I can say, all right, well, who cares a lot about this value? Like, what are the characteristics of a target customer that makes them, put a high price on this thing that you can do? And then the last thing is, well, I got this value of these people. What's the best context to position my product in such that this value is obvious for these folks? So that's how I cracked the where do we start and how do we get to it thing. Everything flows from the next into kind of a waterfall thing. So in my mind, that's how it works.
Love it. Okay, thank you. Where should people start with positioning? Because maybe that's a super obvious question based on what you just said. It's like the first thing. But like, I don't know, if you're thinking about maybe building a SaaS product, how important is positioning like before you build the thing?
Yeah.
Or like, what advice would you give to like SaaS startups thinking about positioning?
Yeah. So in the early days, like let's say you have something that hasn't even launched yet, because I get this question a lot, right? People say, well, I haven't even got the thing out in the market yet, so I don't really know who I compete with. And here's how I like to think about that. So in the early days of a SaaS product, you're still building it. What you have is a positioning thesis. It's a thesis, right? So in my positioning thesis says, here's who I think I compete with. Here's my differentiated capabilities. Therefore, this is the value I can deliver to customers. These are the kind of customers that are really going to dig that. And therefore, this is the market I'm going to win. And it's helpful to actually write all that down and say, and think about what are the assumptions baked into that. And so while you're doing customer discovery and all that good stuff that you do before you actually launch a product, you're trying to validate this as much as you can. That said, we're always wrong. And this is my, having done this for 25 years, we never get it right. Like we get as close as we can, but we never get it right. Sometimes we're, 90% there. Sometimes we're totally wrong on everything, but we never get it right. And so here's the thing. I have this positioning thesis, but I don't actually want to have the positioning so tight because I know it's probably wrong and I'm going to have to change it. So I actually recommend that companies keep the positioning kind of loose at the beginning and wait to see where the market pulls them. So this is my really bad analogy, but I'll use it because I don't have a better one. So it's like you woke up in the morning and you're like, hey, I'm gonna make a fishing net, and my net has been designed. It's amazing for tuna. So that's my positioning thesis: is tuna fishing net. Tuna fishermen are gonna love it. It's gonna be amazing. I'm gonna charge lots of money for it because the world's never seen such a tuna fishing net. But when I launch it, maybe it works and maybe it doesn't, man. And maybe it's really good for tuna, maybe not. So instead, I think a better way to launch a product like that is to say, hey, I got this thing. It's a net for like fish. Oh, big fish, big ones, any kind of big fish. And then let's just put it out there and let's let the fishermen take it out to the parts of the ocean where there's all kinds of big fish. Throw that sucker out there and then let's see what we pull up. Because maybe what we find out is like, oh, it's actually amazing for grouper. And I just didn't know because I'm not a grouper person. And, and then it turns out, oh, the thing's amazing for grouper. Like, it's good for tuna, but it's really good for grouper. So after I know this, then I can tighten it up and say, oh, what I got here is the world's most amazing grouper fishing net, and run with it there. But at the beginning, I don't want to get it so tight that I'm actually discouraging people to try it out because I know I'm likely wrong. I kind of want to keep it loose. And so this is why when people come to work with me as the positioning consultant, if they're pre-launch or they're just starting launch, I usually say, don't sweat it too much. And it's going to feel bad. Like your pitch is going to feel mushy. And it's going to feel like I've got this mushy positioning and it sucks and I really want to tighten it up. And you just got to roll with that. Like you just got to deal with your awkward teenage self in that moment and just say, acknowledge that this feels bad. Acknowledge this is kind of a shitty sales pitch. It's not very tight, but it's okay. And you got to wait till you start seeing the patterns and who loves your stuff and why. Then you can really get tight on it and tighten it up.
I love it. What about, I can imagine yourself as a consultant and a lot of companies when you gave the, going to the CEO, that they get a lot of pushback on the size of the market. Because I guess the easier way is to go for a smaller market that has a very, very specific problem. There's less competitors. You can speak to them very, very deeply. But then the CEO kind of says yeah, but hey, how are we going to scale this thing to 100 million or whatever the number is? So how do you kind of balance that conflict between the CEO and getting that nice niche, easy to market to segment?
Well, here's the thing to think about. When you do positioning, it's not like we're carving this thing into the side of the rock and it's never going to change over the lifespan of the company, right? We're not. It's a living thing. And your product is changing year after year. The market is changing year after year. Customers are changing. Everything's changing. And so when we do positioning work, we expect it to likely live for a year or two, but we don't know. And sometimes everything changes and, we're changing the positioning every 6 months. But typically what happens is you're positioned in a way and then you get a big release next year and that allows you to puff out the positioning a little bit or change it a little bit. So usually what we do when we're doing this work and we're thinking about addressable market, we're usually looking out, what's our revenue target this year or next year? And then you say, how tight can we get this in terms of our target segment and still make the number?
Yeah.
So most of the time what we'll get is, I'll talk to companies and they'll literally be like, we need to close 100 deals this year. And you'll say, okay. And they'll say, but we don't want to just focus on banking because that's too narrow. And I'm like, you only got to close 100 deals this year. Is it really too narrow? I don't know. And don't worry about it because next year, if you say, okay, well, next year I want to close 1,000 deals and I think banking's too narrow, well, we'll expand it out then. And maybe we'll say we're from financial services at that point and we'll include insurance and then no problem. We can do 1,000 deals. So most of the time I think people, they're trying to position for what they want to be in 10 years and they're not there yet, right? And instead, a much better way to think about it is let's just position to make it really obvious and easy to bring on the best fit customers we can And we'll worry about what the positioning is going to look like when we've got a broader product for a broader audience in 3 years or 4 years or 5 years when we get there, because the positioning is going to shift. And then the next thing everyone will say is, yeah, but we'll establish this brand as being just for banks, and then you'll go to puff it out for other things. And it's like, oh my gosh, every company you know has done this. It's not hard. It's not hard at all. People think branding is again like carving it into the side of the mountain. Like, let's talk about Salesforce. What was Salesforce when they started? They were the world's greatest CRM for micro companies, not even SMBs, micro companies. It was you got 3 licenses or 5 licenses for free at the beginning.
Yeah.
Like, and then they were like that for years. It was like if you had more than 10 sales reps, you weren't in their target market. And look at them now. Does anybody, do we feel the positioning baggage of that? Does anybody look at Salesforce? And that wasn't that long ago. Like, does anybody look at Salesforce and say, oh, yeah, no, they're not for enterprise. They're only for little wee SMBs. No, they evolved, the product evolved, and the positioning evolved as they grew up, and they went up market. And now they're a terrible fit for a company that only has a couple of sales reps, in my opinion, particularly one that doesn't think they're going to grow into it. Why would you pick Salesforce if they're actually a terrible fit for the market that they started out in? But they're a great fit for all kinds of other pieces of that market that are way more upstream and, frankly, much more lucrative for them.
Got it. Not set in stone. What about, this is a hypothetical example. What if you, and I say it's hypothetical, I've spoken to many different SaaS companies that kind of do this. They build a product and then it can end up being quite complex. Maybe I can give an example of a recent one I spoke to. So they do invoicing, like invoice and pay, which means they're up against like QuickBooks and Xero and those guys.
Right.
Then they did inventory management, which is like a whole other thing. And then they have like ERP software, which is like a whole other thing. And like, they're like kind of come to us and they say like, hey, we have this thing, it's built, like we have some customers, not too many, but like we just need you guys to throw some like marketing magic dust on this thing and like get us some revenue. It's like, but guys, in the real world this doesn't work. Like, you know, so how do you even go about tackling such a complex, complex suite of products and trying to nail that segment of customer?
Yeah, you know, and this is a thing we see in startups a lot, right? Like a lot of startups that I've worked with, like building product is their happy place, right? Like we just like to build product and not have to worry about selling it too much. Like, wouldn't it be great if everyone just bought our great thing and we didn't have to worry about that? So here's the thing: sometimes you want to sell the whole suite because that's the easy thing to sell. Sometimes you actually want to lead with one thing and then back into the other stuff. And that's the first thing you're going to have to decide. So what's the easiest sale here? So if like Salesforce, again, great example. Like for years after Salesforce had Service Cloud and Marketing Cloud and a bunch of other stuff, if you went to their website, they didn't talk about any of it. They talked about CRM because the idea was CRM was the wedge product. You were going to buy CRM. And then once you were all into their CRM world, then the reason you wanted their marketing thing is because it integrated with their CRM. The reason you wanted their service thing is because it integrated into the CRM. And so they got to sell you the wedge product first, then they worry about everything else. So if you looked at their company positioning, it was all about CRM. We're the world's number one CRM. And in fact, they've been doing that up until very, very recently. And now they've got this thing called Customer 360, which is their attempt to position the suite of stuff all together. And I would say 9 out of 10 people still see them as a CRM company that does a whole bunch of other stuff. Now, other times, the fact that you've got a suite of things all together actually makes it easier to sell. So, like I would argue HubSpot was this at the beginning. Like HubSpot was literally coming in and replacing a handful of dinky little one-off tools that you use to manage your website at the beginning. This was before they were really marketing automation. They were just like on-site stuff. And so they came in and said, you know, we've got the all-in-one product that eliminates 5 other products that you've got that are a pain and they don't integrate well and they don't work well together. And so we're just selling you this one thing. Now, if you look at, like, again, when we're tackling this as a positioning challenge, I can only make that decision between the two if I've actually tested it out. So, if the company comes to you and says, okay, we've got this thing, we don't really have any customers yet, and we don't know if it's easier to sell the suite or to just sell the individual things. And we don't know, maybe one of these products is a good wedge product, but we don't really know. And at that point, I would say, yeah, I don't think you're ready for positioning yet. I think you need to go and get a bunch of customers. You need to spend some time trying to sell some stuff, and let's see what works and what doesn't. Keep the positioning kind of loose. You might want to call it a menu of things, not try to position it as a suite or an individual thing, and say, look, here's what's on the menu today. You can buy them individually, or it's all you can eat. You tell me.
Yeah.
And we have to kind of figure it out.
Yeah. This one is kind of outside of positioning. I know you have a lot of experience in marketing, so it's a bit of a selfish question for me, because in an ideal world, people that come to us already have a position in the market and then they want us to do the marketing. But let's assume someone has their hypothesis or their thesis of positioning, and they've kind of got it right. What are kind of the next steps in how you go about communicating to that market? So the messaging. Do you have any kind of principles or things that you think about when it comes to messaging?
Yeah. So here's the first thing. So first thing, you gotta make sure that you're all really tight and in agreement on the positioning. That's the first thing, right? So generally what we've got is, companies will come to me and sometimes their messaging isn't working, but the reason it's not working is because, sales thinks the positioning is this, and product has a slightly different view of it. Marketing's got a slightly different view of it. So it's always worthwhile to get everybody together, get them all aligned on the positioning. But once we have that, and we got the whole executive team, everybody's in agreement, alignment. Here's what we compete with. Here's how we're different. This is the value we can deliver no one else can. These are the customers that love our stuff. This is the market we intend to win. Once we have that, I think what everybody wants to do immediately after that is go build messaging. And I don't actually think that's a good next step, just because I don't know how we test it. So if what I'm trying to do is test the positioning, and I'm doing it with A/B test on landing page copy, let's say, I'm testing positioning, but I'm also testing messaging. I'm also testing landing page design. I'm also testing a whole bunch of other stuff. And how do I make sure I've got the right traffic? Do I have the right traffic? I can't really assess what's working and what isn't working with a test like that. So what I think is a better thing to do is to take your positioning and translate it into a sales pitch. And so in the work I do with companies, that's what we do. So we'll do the positioning bit, and then what we'll do is we'll work out a storyboard for a sales narrative. So how do I actually encapsulate this positioning in a sales pitch? Now, in a sales pitch, I got a lot more leeway to test the actual positioning, because if I say it one way and it doesn't quite work, I can try it again another way. And I can mess around with it a bit. I've got, I know exactly who the customer is. They've already been qualified. And I can see where are they furrowing their brow, or where are they getting excited. So, and then I can hear the questions they ask. Like, we get halfway through and they're like, so you're just like Salesforce. You're like, oh God, no, we're not. And say, okay, there's a problem here. So usually what we'll do is we'll storyboard out this sales narrative, and then marketing and sales will work together to build a pitch out of it. So deck, demo, script, and then we'll go try it on a bunch of qualified prospects and see if it works. And in the process of doing that testing, we're generally tuning the story as we go along. Like, hey, we can't use this word, it freaks people out. Or, oh, we got to have this come in before we talk about this. And we'll learn a lot about the pitch doing that. And then once we got a sales pitch that everybody's comfortable with, then we can take the pitch and the positioning and go build messaging with that. And so what I recommend companies do is, what they want to do is go, do this homepage copy thing. At this point, we've already validated the positioning, and copy gets used in lots of places, and the homepage is just one place, right? And copy for the homepage is different than copy on your brochure, or copy for your emails, or copy for anything else. So what I recommend that folks do is they build a messaging document, which is like, here's the tagline, here's the 20-word description, here's the 50-word description, here's the 100-word description, here's our 3 core pieces of value, here's the approved copy for that, here's how we talk about particular features, and we'll build the big messaging document, and that's our starting point for anything we got to do with copy. So once we have that, then we can say, okay, let's start from here, but build copy for the homepage, and we can A/B test that. Let's start from here, build copy for the brochure or the email chains or whatever else wherever else we're going to go do copy. So that's what I recommend to folks. That's what I used to do when I was the VP.
That's incredible advice. And only speaking for myself, because we're obviously an agency, so it's not like we're selling a $9.99 product. So I have to go and pitch in to these people, and you can always tell. I fine tune my deck over like 100 different times, and you can, for example, in the early days, I remember I used to add values in of our agency values, and no one gave a shit.
No one cared.
You could see people's eyes glazed over. Nobody cares. Take it out.
I know.
And it's like
Simon Sinek, he's done us dirt. The number of companies that come in, they're like, we need to start with our why, and I'm like, not in your pitch deck. Start with it somewhere else.
Yeah. But that's really, really good advice.
It works, right? Like, and it gives you a feel for, again, what's a customer excited about? What are they not excited about? And it's really different when you're sitting across on the Zoom call like this 100%. Versus I'm just looking at the data from the heat map or whatever, and people like this or they don't like that. And it's really different when you've got someone and they're looking at it like, making this face like, what is that thing? And you're like, oh yeah, no, this isn't working.
It was always right at the end as well. I'd have like the values would be at like the first section, which would be about us, and I'd say like, quickly, any questions before I move on? It'd be like crickets every time.
Right.
Yeah, we're bored. Just like
we're waiting for the pitch to start, please.
So took it out. One thing that really strikes me about you, April, is you're incredible storyteller. You're one of those people that's blessed when you kind of ask you a question, you're able to kind of package up the answer in a really nice story.
Thanks.
Was that some? Yeah, but was that something that you kind of consciously developed? So you just got loads of experience, so you have loads of stories to draw upon?
That's one thing. Like, it helps to be old, right? And then you're like, I got experience. Sit down, kids. Let me tell you about when I walked to school in the snow up to my knees. Yeah, so that's one thing. So you got a story for everything after you've been doing this for a while. The other thing is that, like, part of that's born out of necessity. Again, positioning kind of a complicated thing, and so I recognized really early on that it doesn't really click with people until you give them some examples. And so it's one thing to talk about it philosophically, and it's another thing to say, hey, I had this thing, and it stank, and then we did this and it was better. So it's, I think some things, again, if we're talking tactics, we don't need a lot of storytelling, right? It's like flip the switch here and turn this thing off. But when we get into strategy stuff, there's decisions inside decisions inside decisions. And so it's one thing to it's one thing to understand positioning conceptually. It's a very different thing to put it into an actual example and say, this was the set of decisions we had to make in order to get here. And it wasn't just one thing, it was 19 things. And we could have made different choices and we would have had really different outcomes. And so you kind of need to build that into a story or an example. Otherwise, everybody's like, all I got to do are these 5 things, just solve for the 5 things and it's all good, right? Yeah, good, great. And then you go to the office and try to do it. It's like, no, wrong, actually. I can't even solve for one of them. What are you talking about? Yeah.
Can I ask what your thoughts are on? There's a lot of, I don't know if radical differentiation is a bit of a buzzword at the moment, but what is your 2 cents on? I don't know. What's your 2 cents on? Yeah, being radically different.
Oh, I'm all for differentiation. Like, this is the problem in positioning, right? Is it's really hard. It's really hard to get chosen. Like, if you've got a product in a market and there are other competitors in that market and you're brand new starting out, like, who would pick you?
Yeah.
Like, why would anybody pick you? Like, you don't just have to be kind of different. Like, you actually got to have some spectacular difference because people are taking a bet on you. Like, and there's, they could use Excel for free. They could hire an intern. They could use their accounting program. I know it wasn't built for that, but we already have it and we know how to use it. And like, I get a lot of people come to me and they'll say, well, why aren't we assessing the people that didn't choose us? Because don't we want them to change their minds and come and pick us? And I'm like, no, you don't understand how this works. Like, every customer that you get as a startup, you have to treat this like a small miracle. Like, oh my God,
sure.
you had all these choices and all these other things you could have did, and you picked us. Wow.
Yeah.
What is it about you, weirdo, that made you do that? And what you're trying to do is get in onto that. So I do think that for startups to survive at all, there needs to be differentiators. And generally, they're not little things. They're not just nice to have things. It's like generally they've got a completely different approach to the problem, the ones that are successful. And so they are radically different. And I think the key thing with positioning is to pull that differentiation out and put it in a context where customers get it, right? They get what it is, they get why it's different, and more importantly, they get the value of that differentiation and say, oh yeah, I don't want to use my accounting program for that. Oh yeah, I get everybody likes Excel, but we're not going to do that because this thing is so awesome. That's what you're trying to get at. So yeah, I think there needs to be differentiation. Like, some people come to me and they'll say, we don't really have much differentiation, blah, blah, blah. And then I'll say, well, how much revenue are you doing? And they're like, $2-3 million bucks. And I'm like, what are you talking about?
Someone's choosing you.
You think your customers are stupid? Like, they're picking you, and that's not a small thing. And you're doing 2-3 million revenue. You absolutely have differentiators. And not only that, there's a yawning gap between you and the competitors, at least in the minds of customers. You might not see the differentiation in the same way customers do, and that's dangerous. So let's figure that out.
Yeah, got it. Good advice. How was it for you with? This is the first book you've written.
Mm-hmm. Might be the last.
How was that?
Too.
How was that? How was that process? Like, how do you condense like 25 years of experience in marketing into one book? Like, what was that process like?
Well, so at the beginning, I thought I didn't need a book. I thought I could just write a blog post on it, and be done with it. And so I tried to write a blog post, and it got longer and longer and longer and longer. And then for a while, I was teaching a class. So I was teaching a class at a couple of universities and a handful of startup accelerators. And you learn a lot by teaching your stuff, because you'll get people that aren't marketers, that know nothing, come in and ask you a question that sounds kind of stupid, but it actually exposes a flank there where you're like, well, I never really thought about that. How does that work? I don't know. And so you learn a lot about your stuff having to teach it over and over. It also helps you explain it get to a point where you can explain it in a simple way. Like, at the beginning, I had the methodology, but I was the only one that had to understand it, because I was running it myself as the VP marketing. But then, I try to explain it to other people or teach it to other people, and that's way harder than just doing it. So I probably spent, I don't know, 3 years or so just trying to teach this stuff before I felt like I was ready to start writing it down. And then I thought, oh, I'll just make a blog post out of this. And the blog post got bigger and bigger. And I was like, okay, this actually needs a book treatment. And then writing the book itself wasn't that hard, because I already kind of had the story straight in my mind, but producing a book was difficult. So I thought, well, I'm writing a book, I'll go get a publisher and do it that way. But then I went and talked to publishers, and I really didn't like the story I heard from them. Like, they were kind of like, well, we own your book now, and so we get to make decisions like what the title is going to be and what the cover is going to look like. And some of their covers are terrible. And we're gonna own the distribution strategy on it, including what languages we do or do not decide to translate it into and stuff. And these folks literally didn't understand my audience at all. So that would be like me developing a product and then giving it to some marketers that had no clue about my audience whatsoever, and have them say, yeah, like, we're going to pay you pennies on the dollar because we're doing all the work here. And it's like, as far as I can tell, you're not doing any work. Like, all you're doing is getting it in a bookstore, and none of my people even buy in a bookstore. So like, what? Mm-hmm. So anyway, so I wasted a lot of time talking to publishers, and then ultimately decided I didn't trust them to be able to sell the book. And I thought I'd do better selling it on my own. So I ended up self-publishing, like, with help. I hired a company to help me produce the book, to editors and layout and cover design and all that stuff. And then I ran all the marketing myself, which you would do anyways, even if you had a publisher, because they don't really do any marketing. All they do is distribution. And their idea of distribution is stores, physical stores. And so instead, I just handled all that stuff myself. And so that was a bit of a learning curve.
Yeah.
For me.
How did you do that, by the way? What was the marketing approach?
Well, so I treated it like a product. And so I said, well, I'm going to run, what I call the full IBM. So when I was at IBM and we launched a product, we would have distinct phases of a launch. So at IBM, there's the pre-launch, the pre-launch, launch, post-launch, and momentum launch. And so my launch plan was a year and a half-ish, and it started 6 or 8 months before the book came out. And so there's a whole bunch of pre-launch, which is, hey, I'm thinking about a thing, and you should sign up for my list. And I'm, social media and blogging a bit about the topics and whatever. And so building a bit of a following and all that stuff. And then I've got pre-launch, which is, I know the date when the thing is coming. I'm trying to get everybody hyped. I'm like, sign up here and we'll let you know when it comes. And I did a little bit of a pre-sale, not much, but a little bit of a pre-sale. And then there's launch, which is actually the least interesting part of the thing. That was another thing that drove me crazy about the publishers. They were all like, there's launch and that's it. It's a thing. It lasts 3 days and then we're done. I'm like, are you nuts? Nothing sells like that. So then we had a launch, and that was a week, and then there's a big thing like, hey, the thing is available, wow, and then I had 2 or 3 things, and this is true for any product, right? Like, you've got there's lots of marketing channels available to you, but you're not actually able to work them all. And so generally what you want to do is pick the 2 or 3 that you can really work, and then just really lean into those. So for me, that was public speaking. So I had already been doing a reasonable amount of public speaking, so I really leaned into that. The year my book launched, I did 50, almost 60 speaking engagements. Wow. In a year. So yeah, I had many weeks where I was doing like 2 or 3 in a week. And then podcasts. So I did a ton of podcasts where I'm like this on there talking about the book. And in a little bit of stuff on social, although I'm not super active on social, but I have not a very big following on Twitter, but they're very engaged. Okay. So I ran some specials on Twitter and a couple of contests and things like that just to get people hyped, and a very small amount of email marketing, but I didn't actually consider that a real marketing channel for me. Gotcha. And then I ran a couple of sales and I did a couple other things, but yeah, so I had a very long view on the marketing plan for this thing. And yeah, totally exceeded all my targets.
Congratulations. Yeah, congratulations. I mean, I just bought the book today. I should have read it before I came
see,
on
it's
this
still
podcast,
working.
Another sale. You've got ROI on this podcast.
Nice.
$7 book sale.
Put that $2 in my bank account.
Yes. Maybe I can ask you just to close up. I was thinking of one really good question. I'm not sure if it's a good question or not.
Come on, they're all good questions, Todd.
Yeah. I was thinking, like, what advice would you give to a SaaS marketer that's like looking to grow a SaaS product? Or maybe another way of framing it is like, if you were looking to hire someone to run marketing, like what characteristics or traits would you look for? Like any advice for marketers in SaaS?
Yeah, I used to do a lot of hiring. Like back when I was VP marketing, I, did a lot of hiring, and hiring marketers is hard. It's hard for a lot of reasons, but one of them is like, you can have people with great resume, but they got a lot of bad habits.
Yeah,
And you bring them in and it's like, oh, you're so experienced, and yet I have to unwind a bunch of stuff. And then you can have other folks that don't have much on their resume, but just attitude, like just amazing attitude. And they're just like, I don't know, but I'll figure it out, And these are always my favorite people to hire. Like,
those are the ones I like.
So at the beginning, I always tried to hire for experience. And towards the end, I was 100% hiring for attitude. Like, I didn't care if you didn't have too much experience. It's like, I'll teach you. It's not that hard, right? I'll teach you.
Yeah.
But I can't teach you. There's a handful of things I can't teach you, right? I can't teach you to give a shit about the work. Like, I can't teach you to care about the output. I can't, and that's one thing that I was always looking for. Like, were people trying to do excellent work? Like, give me an example where you're trying to do excellent work. Like, you can't sort of teach people. They either got that or they don't. And I think that matters a lot in marketing, because none of our stuff is great. It's all kind of crap. Like, we're all kind of doing the best we can. Like, we just have all these constraints, and we're always trying to tease out a puzzle out of all these constraints and do the best thing we can. So it's very rare we have a thing that's just a total slam dunk or a total failure. Almost everything sits in the gray area in the middle somewhere, and we're just trying to push it more towards success and away from failure. So you kind of got to have this attitude of continuously trying to make it better, and being jazzed when something goes good, and sort of doubling down on that thing when something goes good. So I don't know. So I don't know if that's not really advice for people starting out, but that's what I was always looking for when I was trying to hire people. I was way more about attitude than I was about experience. Like, I could teach you how to do stuff, but I couldn't teach you how to care.
It's taken me quite a few years to come to that realization. I think probably only in the last year that's been a big shift for me. I don't necessarily hire based on fancy looking CVs. It's like, if you have the right mindset and you have some evidence to back that up, then
we're all kind of self-taught in marketing to a certain extent too, right? Like, it's especially we're doing digital stuff, and in startups, like, almost nothing you learn in school is all that applicable.
And it changes so fast as well, right?
Everything changes. And I mean, you can go learn some of the tactical mechanics of things, right? Like, I can send you on a course to go learn AdWords, and you'll come back and be pretty good at AdWords. But then there's all the stuff around what actually makes it successful and not, that you just got to kind of power through, and you learn from experience.
For sure. Well, April, thank you so much for doing this. Really, really great advice, and thank you for all the work you've done on positioning. It's definitely helped me with a bunch of projects I've worked on. So thanks again.
Well, that's awesome. Well, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.